Yeah, I'm a physician and I'm involved in clinical trials and clinical development since approximately 20 years. And during this experience, I had the opportunity to be involved in orphan drug development with all this specificity for such developments, and it's now a kind of specialty.
Okay. Thomas Meyer, the next one. By the way, your program has a wrong title for him as well here. We have a lot of new CEOs in this audience today because Thomas became CEO as well of Santera. But Thomas, a little bit about your affiliation with clinical development and this space.
Yeah, thank you. I trained neuroscientist, and about 10, 11 years ago I started a small company in Basel which was dedicated to drug discovery in Duchenne muscular dystrophy at the time. After a merger with a German-based company, Santera Pharmaceuticals started in 2004. I was the chief scientific officer since that start until very recently where I took over the CEOship of the company.
Okay, welcome. Charlie Richard, Shire.
Thank you. I think my early experience was a fellowship in human genetics early on, and my interest in therapeutics was going beyond just diagnosing these fascinating diseases with really trying to come up with some treatments and some therapies. So I've been at Shire Human Genetic Therapies for about 5 years.
And then Anne van Es.
Yeah. My name is Anne van Es-Johansson. I normally talk very loud. I am the head of clinical development in SOBI, that is Swedish Orphan Biovitrum now. A long time ago, in '88, I left the hospital, pediatric and endocrinology. And I think I was one of the first salami slicers in those days, but the word didn't exist yet because we were going to use growth hormone for girls with Turner syndrome. I'm from the Netherlands, as you can hear in the beginning. In order to get 60 girls with Turner syndrome into your trial, I was racing around the whole Holland, and I didn't know that this was like orphan treatment, like, you know, from the beginning, because I went home to the patients, I talked to the mothers. So then my life was very much about understanding what it means to have a child like that. 12 years ago, I married my husband, and he came with his son, Michael, who is now 25, and he has Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. So now I know I don't only understand what it means for other people to have a patient in their life. I have for my stepson, our own son, with Douchiness in our life. So, you know, I'm like stakeholder with many hats. And then last but not least, I'm also, our company, I started with Biovitrum 2 years ago. We merged with the Swedish Orphan. So now I have the orphan space, like in the private and in the personal and in the business. So it's there in my life.
You really are a
multi hats
person here in this audience. So whenever we want to talk about the parent view or the mother view, we can ask you as well. But Charlie, maybe you just told me a story early this morning about dialogue with patients, yeah? Because I always feel we get about, as presenters, we get about 10 emails every week from all over the world, parents asking, how far have you come? What's your experience in that field, and how do you dialogue in the development stage already with parents and patients? Do you have an example there?
I have an example, so thank you very much, Hans. So we were talking this morning, and thanks for the opportunity to pinch hit a little bit here. We have a family member, I'll just call him Mr. Z, and we're conducting 2 phase 1/2 trials in MPS intrathecal therapy. And I think this example kind of encapsulates everything that's both just so wonderful about working directly with patients in the orphan space and also the challenges. This is a brilliant man who, like many parents, learns about the disease when the diagnosis is made. Mr. Z travels the world. He's been to Congress to testify. He's actually worked with ML Caucus and his Every Life Foundation. He's managed to find his way into the office of the president, I guess it's the chairman of the orphan drugs at the NIH. I mean, we got a cold call one day, and the head called me and said, hey, I have Mr. Z in my office here, and he wants to know, how come you guys aren't moving faster in your drug treatment? And, you know, just having him around, and he's been at our site, and we talk to him quite a bit, is just inspiring. And as a company, we always think, gosh, we got to find a way to hire this guy. He knows more about things than we do, and he can motivate and inspire us actually to move forward. But it doesn't come without its challenges. I think one of the physicians that's working for me, Mr. Z, has him on speed dial. So he wants to call every week. He wants to know what the progress is. He reads prodigiously. Any analyst meeting that we have or press release that we have, he'll call and want to know, you know, what's up? Have you changed tactics? Are you moving forward? What can you tell me about the disease? And, you know, that part we just want to say, can I take a vacation, not just from Shire, but maybe Mr. Z, but he's kind of like the Woody Allen movie Zelig. I don't know if you remember Zelig. He's so clever. He's been everywhere and done everything, but it's still the challenge we have as a company and how to communicate with him and let him know what we can say about trials as we're moving along. So.
And of course, when you talk to Mr. Z, the chance is quite high that the next date will be on the blog.
It doesn't, maybe it will be. You know, it's sort of in the world of the internet and the cyber world that we have, the patient groups are very active and the blogosphere is very active, and it does get around. I have another story. I was talking to the principal investigator of one of our trials, and we were talking about how we might design our phase 3 study. The next day, it's on the blogosphere, all the eligibility criteria and what's going on, and we got a call from England to the US, and I said, how does this happen? My boss doesn't even know what the eligibility criteria that we're talking about for the phase 3 study is. And so we had to have a talk with our principal investigator, but that is really an example about how tight the community is.
Absolutely. So Anne, in Swedish Orphan, I mean, you are developing compounds right now. You used to develop compounds for hunters, which is also a very rare disease. How do you communicate with stakeholders, well, patients, for example, or parents, throughout the development process? What do you do?
Yeah, you know, you want to do something. You want to talk to those patients. You know how important it is. But one thing, just to connect to what you're saying, is we're also a public company. So, you know, there are things that you can't disclose, or that you really, because of the laws and the rules of regulations, put you in a very tight frame. So I find that very challenging. It's easier to train your own people to have, you know, what you can say and have communication charters and say, if someone calls, send them to me or send them to the CEO or to the head of communication, because we have Q&As, what we are allowed to disclose or not. But then, you know, when you're close to people like Mr. Z, or you talk to a mother, or, you know, Nick from the society calls me, you know, you like those people, you want to do something. So that I find really, really challenging. But you can't jeopardize your company. You have to really be compliant to the rules and regulations and the laws that are out there.
Annie-Claude, what's your advice about communication and dialogue?
Probably at one time point during the development, the company has to make the choice to make the drug available or not for compassionate use. And this is one of these situations where there are a lot of requests from patients, direct requests. You know, they're really emailing in the global mailbox of the company, asking, where are you in your development? Can I be enrolled in a clinical trial? And when they are in a country where the studies are not running, you can just say no, and then the next step is, can I have access to the drug by any other means? And probably compassionate use when there is, I would say, enough data accrued but still not approved. Compassionate use may be one of these solutions, and it's probably a very intensive experience for any points, and probably also because of the close contact with the patients.
Yeah, and Thomas, I think the same counts for you. I mean, in your idabenone trials, at a certain moment, I can imagine that your mailbox was flooded with requests from parents and patients as well.
Yeah, that's true, and in particular it's true for groups of patients who are more outspoken. So I think having patient communities for Duchenne muscular dystrophy or Pompe's disease, I mean, they have helped greatly to create awareness. But I should say that there are other diseases, and I will talk about one of those in my presentation a little later, where there's virtually no patient representation, visible. And the reason simply is that the patients are blind. They can't use the computer. They are shut off from the environment, basically. But I agree. We have had requests for allowing access to idebenone in Friedreich's ataxia and in Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy more recently. And we are able to implement a named patient program in Europe which allows patients to have access to the approved drug which is available in Canada. And I think it was mentioned yesterday by the representatives of Ataxia UK that the drug is available and approved in Canada, but is not available in Europe or United States. So we have now found ways to allow patients access, but reimbursement still is a big hurdle for these patients.
I can imagine that, yeah. As you probably know, the official rules are, certainly in Europe, that communication directly with patients, well, communication is allowed, but if it ever gets the sense of promotion that you're trying to induce a patient in order to go to a physician and ask for a drug later on, that is absolutely not allowed in Europe. And maybe from the audience, there are some big pharma companies here as well, and I know for one that our big partner GSK is in there. But Philippe, could I ask you to share a little bit of your comments about how a company like GSK works with communication with patients, because you can't be continuously working with that with everybody.
Yeah, with pleasure, and that will certainly come back this afternoon as an interesting topic when we'll have our panel discussion on the how we interact with small and big companies, because definitely what we try to do is to have a very strong and robust scientific engagement policy. Within GSK, we are certainly not the only ones to do that. So we definitely want to do, the basic principle is to avoid pre-promotion. So that's basically the one single thing which is so important, is to avoid promoting any drug in development before it is registered. And that's true everywhere in the world. Now, we go very far in that sense, and we certainly agree with all our partners. We have a series of collaborators now, both academic collaborators, charities, and biotech companies like Prosenza. Everybody agrees on the principle. Now the devil is in the details when it comes to implementation, when it comes to having press release on clinical data, and and the tone you use, and when you have a press release. So then it's become a little bit more complex sometimes to agree, to make sure that you don't give hope. And I like your slide, actually. The patients always interpret the next step. So if it's just a product in development, it's interpreted as a drug, and the slide was exactly what it is. So I think we need to be very careful on that, and that's where, for a large company like us, of course, it's less critical to have a press release for phase 2 clinical data in a rare diseases program. And even if, for me, as head of R&D for GSK Rare Diseases, it is important for Andrew Whitty or Moncef Slaoui, the CEO or the chairman of R&D for GSK, it's not that important. And for our stakeholders, as GSK in general, it's not that important. We also need to make sure we understand the needs of partners. So there is a compromise to find there, and that's the whole discussion.
Yeah, very good point.
Thomas, comment to that. Just say there's a very fine line of what you can do and what you can't do, and it's a day-to-day challenge to really obey this fine line. I just give you an example. Last week I had a call from a doctor in Germany who said, I have a patient here with Leber's disease. He lost his eyesight in the last 2 weeks. What can I do? I have read your publication about the clinical data. Tell me what the dose is I should give that patient. And he didn't give up. And I have to say something. I cannot say, well, send us an email, because the patient is there and the doctor has to do something. On the other hand, I'm very well aware that I can't say, do this or that, because I'm not allowed to do. But in real life, it is very challenging, in particular, maybe in smaller companies like ours, where I am, as a CEO, only 2 mouse clicks or 2 phone numbers away from the patient. And they find me, and they find everybody in the company. I don't know whether it's the same with bigger companies, but you're challenged with emails where the full medical record is sent to me, dumped on my email account, and they ask for advice. I can say, well, go back, or it's very difficult to find a solution which is respecting the patient's or physician's requests, and at the same time obeying the rules that are obviously have to be followed. It's very difficult in the real life, I have to say.
Yeah, maybe I can comment briefly. So, as I said, we have established and recently we reviewed our scientific engagement policy, as we call it within GSK, which is a very long document or sort of charter that we all want to respect, and we want our collaborators to respect as well. I can say that the rare diseases specificities have been acknowledged and taken into account. So that was also my role when we were talking about a scientific engagement policy at the level of GSK. I want to make sure that the rare diseases specificities and exactly what you are mentioning is taken into account. So regarding what we do vis-à-vis the patients, our principles are that we can certainly talk to the patients. We can certainly mention clinical data of drugs in development to the patients. That's very important. However, we don't want to talk first to the patients community, so the data needs to be first communicated to the medical and scientific community, so that's obvious. Second thing, it should always be solicited by the patients or patient representatives, because otherwise it's promotion. And the third thing, which is sometimes a bit difficult to implement, and probably we don't have time to discuss that here in detail, but we don't want to sponsor and therefore to pay to organize or be co-sponsor to organize a meeting with patients' associations where we would talk, because that would mean that we pay them to listen to us. That we don't want to do. And sometimes it's difficult to implement because these guys, to organize their meeting, needs the sponsorship, and they also want you to talk. So, but the principle is obvious. We don't want to pay patients or patient associations to listen to us.
Good point. Charlie.
Just to that point, I think one of the things that was eye-opening for me when I came to Shire in 2006 was that many of the ultra-orphan disease annual meetings of the associations were a combination of a scientific day and a patient day. And so half the meeting was patients intermingled with the scientists. You have scientific presentations, and then you'd have presentations on supportive care, for instance. So you'd have questions from the audience from the scientists, and then at the end of the meeting, patients would come up to you and talk. And just one other follow-up to that story, we hired a head of compliance from a large pharma and came to us, and we were describing all this, and she was shocked. And she went through this, you can't do that, and she sort of went through the whole, you're not allowed to have that, and it was sort of 3 weeks of no, 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 and we sort of sat down and achieved some sort of rapprochement within the laws of good compliance, and it was good for both of us.
A great example. Now, you also had this other hat. I mean, your husband's son has Duchenne muscular dystrophy. I mean, as a mother, as somebody who's very close to a patient, what's your view from that perspective?
No, it's a very interesting dimension that came to my life, because also Michael is 25 now, so for many, many years, you know, Douchiness was Douchiness, and yeah, we have learned to cope with that. Then you come to all those meetings, I meet you, your company, there are other compounds in development, fantastic. But then what do I bring home? And that's like the hope slide. I don't want to say to Michael, oh, Michael, you know what? I know this guy, they have this compound in phase 2. Well, you know, it's not really for boys like you, but maybe if I talk to Hans, you know, you can't do that. So it's a very extra dimension. It's fantastic there are compounds in phase 2, in phase 3, but, you know, will it help our boy? No, probably not. So there you also then have these different hats. I am a stakeholder on different levels, like how do I go home? How do I translate this hope, this cure coming up to our boy? It's fascinating, you know, what you then have to go through and how you have to sort out the professional, the mother, the stakeholder. Yeah, it is fascinating, and I don't know how to guide you there. What I try to do is, you know, when I think or when something comes up in my system or when I talk to you, is have awareness of which part of me is talking to you now. Is this Anne from Sobi, or is this stepmother Michael? But, you know, I can't split myself up all the time. You know, I bring myself. So, yeah, it's interesting. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I can imagine that, yeah. Charlie?
Just a brief story. So my brother's daughter was diagnosed with phenylketonuria, and I come from a big family. There's 7 brothers and sisters, 8 kids, and half of us are carriers. And I had a similar experience. Talking with my brother, he wants to know, should I be on this new treatment or shouldn't I? And after about 5 minutes into the conversation, he said earlier on, how come I know more about this disease than you do, and you're the physician? And it just brought that home to me in a very personal sort of way. About what it means to a family. So we get together as a family, all 35 of us of a nuclear family, and the topic of phenylketonuria inevitably comes up. And who do we test? And do I test myself? And what about our grandkids? And it's part of our life now.
Thanks for sharing that, Charlie. By the way, I have to say this, we did not know before this panel that Anne and Charlie had these affiliations with rare disease patients. I didn't know that, so they were not selected for that reason. But it does show that rare diseases are really around us everywhere. Maybe it's one person with the disease, but collectively, many patients are affected either directly or indirectly. I saw a question from the audience there. Samantha Parker, Orphan Europe. You don't have to introduce yourself.
Oh, damn, that's what I was going to say. I've got 2 comments that I'd like to make, because we're talking about good ethical practice and being ethical people, and I think that's extremely important. I think we're in that, because we're in this field, it's not just by chance that we're here. We were determined to be in this field. But I'd like to point out that Eurordis, and Eurordis has excellent guidelines on how patient organizations should be working with pharmaceutical companies. And I think it's quite inspiring when you're building your own guidelines to look to those. And I think the comment from the gentleman earlier, that's one of the things that comes out about speaking in conferences. So that was one comment that I wanted to make to draw people's attention to these guidelines. And the second point is the community today is evolving. I started working in this field 11 years ago. And 11 years ago, some of the scientists were still fighting for publications on A mutation. And that has really, really changed. And 10 years ago, we started working on European reference networks, and this was presented yesterday through some of the projects that are financed by the DG Sanko. But there are many European reference networks. And these European reference networks are really communities of practice where clinicians, researchers, patient groups, pharmaceutical companies, in some of our European reference networks, we also have members from the EMA that are serving on these communities. And I think these are excellent, and they're going to evolve as time goes on with the cross-border directive. And I think we should be looking here in the development of our drugs as well, at the early stages, to be working through these groups of people.
Thanks for those comments. I saw a question in the back as well, very far back. Czech Orphan, if I remember well.
This is actually a question for Hans in follow-up to your talk, but also on the topic of patient collaborations. After your VC experience in 2007, 2008, and then the formalization of the partnership with GSK, if I understood the story of Prosensa right, you were started as a patient-funded organization. How has that changed? Has that improved after the GSK partnership? And if it has improved, what are the lessons we could all take away from that in terms of forming partnerships and improving things with more money?
Very good question, thank you. Well, as a matter of fact, it even evolved after that. I was referring to the fact that the first 5 years the company was funded predominantly by patient organizations. And of course that contribution becomes less over time because the stakes become much more higher. I mean, now we talk about tens of millions of euros in order to develop the compounds, even in the collaboration with GSK. And still we are funded by patient organizations, but it has also received another dimension. And the talking about patients versus talking with patients is absolutely in there. The fact that I personally am almost in weekly contact with heads of patient organizations in the Duchenne space all over the world. So it's really a relationship which builds over time, and the dialogue is continuously evolving, and we really see them as our partners. Follow-up question? Well, we have a panel here as well, so one question from the front here. Yeah, you have to run, Matthew.
My name is Olivier Morin from Actelion, and I'd like to share a short experience I had a couple of years ago, and also I have a question to the panel and to the other companies here. I attended a patient organization meeting, and I got caught into an interesting a little workshop because all those organizations wanted to aggregate into an international organization. So they had little round tables, and they invited me and another colleague from Actelion, and they were very eager to know what we thought about how they should organize themselves. And of course, that was a very strange situation for me, but they were very keen in listening to what we thought, and we tried to do that, in a sensible way. Now, my take from that experience is that developing positions in companies as patient advocates, I think, is a very interesting approach, and I know a company in the US who has done that. And my question to the panel and to other companies here is whether this is something they have done, whether this is other companies do to develop positions of patient advocates. That is, people who become, I would say, the face of the company. Mm-hmm. To be the contact with patient organizations.
If I understand your question correctly, do companies in the panel here have dedicated positions in the company?
Yes.
To indeed interact with patient organizations also in the development stage? Anyone wants to react to that? Annie-Claude?
I would say it depends also in the field we are working. So I have experience without such contact and experiences with these contacts, with a very close contact between the company and the patient association.
Anyone else?
Well, in the muscular dystrophy arena, I think I myself be the contact person. That happens because I studied in that area and I was involved in preclinical research in the past, and I met at conferences the representatives of US and European patient organizations. And in fact, also in part answering the question that was raised back there is, one of our very first investors in the predecessor company of Santhera was the Swiss Foundation for Research on Muscle Diseases, and they are still shareholder in the public Santhera company that we currently are. So the answer to your question is that for muscular dystrophies, I'm personally the contact person because people know me from my history as a scientist back when then.
But as a CEO, you sort of expose yourself.
That's real life in a small company. With 27 people, I mean, there are only 27 of us. Somebody has to take up the phone. That's it.
You want to say something about it as well?
Yeah, I can. When I was like the Turner specialist, I was the contact person as the medic, but also as the operational person doing this study. But this was like 88, rules and regulations were a bit differently. I realized now, then it was my first job it was an investigated sponsored study. Now, maybe we as a sponsored a bit too much for today's rules, but then it was okay. So yes, in that time I was the contact person. In this company where I am now in Sobi, we do not have like a dedicated person. However, for example, now that we're going to work with consortiums or with patient organizations, we will have like a contact person, which mainly is the medic or medical person to liaise with the consortium or with the patient organization that we're going to work with. But it's evolving. It's not like, we have this, we always do it like that.
And if I can add the Presenza example, we're not a commercial company yet. We are still in the research and development stage. But the first, you might say, commercial communication function we established, there was actually somebody who takes care of all these emails coming in. Every single parent sending an email will get a reference to go to the right physician, the right center of excellence, to try to get them into registries, to really help these patients with resources of information. So the first position we established was indeed in patient advocacy and patient group relations. In the very far back, I see a question, and then we go to you, Willem. We have a couple of minutes more.
Yes, Stephanie Hoffman from Inobia. I will speak from two different experiences. So first, my experiences at Genzyme, where I developed the patient group relation team from 2007 to 2010. 10. So Genzyme realized it was very important to have a dedicated team to manage relationship with patient organization. And I want to insist on making the difference between relationship with patient organization and patient community. It's very important to connect with the patient organization and to make sure that the messages there are tested and are developed together. Develop program updates, so push information to the community to address already the key question of the community. Make sure that this is written, because information can be deformed if you just communicate orally. So that would be my recommendation. And now I'm working for Enobia, so a small biotech company, and I'm the only employee in Europe, so I'm also in contact with the community there. And there we cannot afford having a special person for the relationship, but I'm taking the experience I've had from Genzyme, and it's really be very realistic in what you are saying, not over-promising, set the expectation right, and try not to contact proactively with the families, leave it to the clinical team to handle just the question relating to access to therapy before approval.
Thanks for sharing those comments, Stephanie. Willem, on the front here, Matthew, yeah, sorry, we make you work for the money Terrapin is making on the conference. So,
Great, thank you. Willem van Weper of 2BBB, a blood-brain barrier company in the Netherlands. Question for the panel involving patients in the regulatory process. I think in the US there are the public panels, and I think in orphan diseases it's really very valuable to not only show the hard facts but also the patient stories, as we've been discussing. I think the US has a better openness to that. In Europe, I remember that the Myozyme approval involved a patient at a CPMP meeting. But do these companies indeed see possibilities to increase the involvement of patients in that process?
Maybe Thomas, you can say something about, because you just confided to me something before the meeting. Maybe you should share it with the audience.
Yeah, what we have in the past 2 years or so had very regular interactions with competent authorities, both in North America, Canada, and the FDA, and also in Europe. And we had involved certainly a number of physicians helping making our points when we talk about trial design and that sort of thing. But we have never engaged patients or patient advocates to any of these meetings. Because I think that is a step that needs to be very carefully thought about when and for what purpose you would do that. So we had not done it, we have no experience, although we have a great deal of experience of interacting with health authorities to get input on clinical study design, data analysis and that sort of thing, and I will come to that in my presentation. But we have deliberately decided not to take that opportunity if it was actually the case that we could bring in patients in early stage discussions with authorities. I mean, if you are then in the final round of, let's say, assessment of your application, that may be something different. But in the time when you start to discuss with authorities a clinical study or design elements, I think it is too early. It is a very technical discussion you have at times. You talk about statistical considerations, power calculations, validity of endpoints, which I think patients may not be able to help you with. We had, on the other hand, had the opportunity in a scientific advice meeting or protocol assistance meeting with the CHMP that they brought in a patient representative. So we had somebody from the Duchenne community on the other side of the table and helping us, making our point vis-a-vis the regulators that this is a valid endpoint. So they brought somebody in who they trust, and it happened to be somebody who would take then actually our view of what the endpoint actually should bring and what the endpoint should be. So they had somebody on their side of the table, but we didn't bring anybody on our side.
I think that's a very nice color. Short, because we are watching time. Microphone here. But that's really about dialogue, to communication traffic that patients are being invited by regulators. Colin?
Yeah, very briefly, because I see a lot of Genzyme alumni speaking. So let's speak on the one that are staying with the company and had the experience. A couple of things. I respectfully disagree with what you say involving the patients in the early stages. First of all, for what I said yesterday, I believe that the presence of the patients, not for the statistical considerations, but just in the clinical trials, to make this realistic and feasible for the patient outcome reports, outcomes for other things, it's important. It's extremely important. This does not mean that they should be brought to the regulatory authorities. By the way, they are already involved because they are part during the Committee of Orphan Medicinal Product, there are patient representatives. So I think that the presence of the patients in an educated way, so not in a passionate, emotional way, is extremely important. Second comment, bringing patients to regulatory authorities. What we did indeed in the approval of Myozyme was a specific decision, was a provocative decision. It was the first time, since then this presentation, it was never possible for the EMA or regulatory authorities in Europe to admit patients into a regulatory oral explanation, so at the plenary session of the CHMP, and we were even warned not to do that. We did it deliberately. Why? Because we wanted to break the ice. Because we wanted to make understand, not even for the disease, we wanted to bring the theory of orphan diseases into the practice, into the realism. And we had a specific, was a magic moment. We had the right individual, so an educated, eloquent, passionate but not too emotional patient who explained what was the disease, not to make a sales pitch to the approval, but to understand, to make understand people that have never seen orphan patients and never spoke with an orphan patient what a rare disease was. This was a seminal moment, maybe not to be repeated again, but change the mindset of the regulators that, by the way, after that meeting, are admitting patients in certain specific circumstances. The last, but I think that in consideration I want to say, I'm sorry, is that I think that we talk a lot about pre-approval use of drugs, communication. I really think that I make, again, for the experience that we had over the last 20 years, we had a really terrific opportunity in working with the patients, but we have also a very important responsibility. I think that you had a very interesting slide that was the word hope. We, in a way, handle, and handle is a big word, but I think that sometimes we say it. We handle the hope of patients, of physicians. We handle the hope of you as a stepmother. And you said it very well, because you are another very special person that you could teach so many things, because you are a mother of an affected child, but also a scientist. And you understand very well what you said. When I come back from these meetings, I don't know what to say, and I have the magic bullet. And we as company also, may I say, we have a very strong responsibility when we authorize the use of investigational product to the patients. Very big responsibility. And I must say that there, the big and the small, it also kicks in. And we have always to remind the ethics of giving hope only when the hope exists, not as a promise that then maybe could be make it a sustainable, adventure for a journey for the company, but not for the patients. This, I would say, is a code of conduct that I think that we, as a group of company, we should debate much more in detail and be much more cohesive.
Thanks for those comments, Carlo. I think that was a very nice closing remark of this panel debate. Thank you very much to our panelists and to you for participating.